You have heard Fatty and I talk about laser helmets before, and we in the past have advised you to stick with something from the road lineup from Laser.
That's right. For fun rides, I love my Laser Jackal with kinetic cord. It's what you think of when someone says mountain bike helmet. It has great visor and great protective coverage. It's also a little bit heavier and doesn't vent quite as well as my Leadville helmet, the one I wore last year, my Laser Z1.
Yeah, the Z1 is a great choice. Now, I was talking at Sea Otter with lifetime Grand Prix racer Kristen Ligon. She is sponsored by Shimano and Laser, and she told me that except for the really hot races, she will wear the Vento. Now, the Vento is Laser's road aero helmet, and Kristen said aero is the reason she wears that helmet.
I'm going to tell you, Hottie, I just ordered a Vento.
Oh, okay.
I'm excited to be getting it. So we know what you're thinking, Fatty, Hottie. I only average 10 or 11 miles per hour on the Leadville course. Why would I need an aero helmet? And that is a good question. Hottie, why the heck do we need an aero helmet?
Yeah, it's not so much your average speed on that day, but those spots along the course where speeds reach above 13 miles per hour, that we're trying to grab some free speed in those sections. Think of the descent out of town, the road around Turquoise Lake, the pipeline section. Those are the spots where aero will matter.
And also aero matters when you're in a headwind, and you will be in a headwind at some point. Now, we're sounding like our friend and marginal gainer, Josh Portner here. Look, the Vento, the Z1, both are going to be great choices, and you can find them both at lasersport.us.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Shimano. This is season 7, episode 12 of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I'm Michael Houghton, Hottie to most.
I'm Fatty. Episode 12. Holy smokes. We're halfway through the season. It's hard. It's coming up. The race is coming up. It always seems to sneak up on us. You know, I got to lose some weight. It's something that I and many of our listeners think about as Leadville race day gets closer. So in this episode, we are going to take the question of body weight head on with the help of a leading researcher.
Ooh, it sounds like a weighty topic. Ouch, that hurt.
And here comes Eldon Nelson with 14 minutes to spare on that clock, the bragging rights and the heavy hardware. That's all you. Welcome back to your Leadville family and your finish line.
Fatty's finishing tips. Since our feature is going to be all about grams, pounds, protein, fat, and carbs, can we call a truce on those areas for your FFT and give the audience something with a lot less measuring and math?
Yeah, fair enough, Hottie. This is going to be a no math FFT. I want to talk about today the part of the Leadville 100 bike race where you are off your bike. That is actually one of the true defining features of the Leadville 100. It is so hard that only the very front of the pack ride all of it. Most of us are going to need to get off and push between 2 and 5 times during the day. And many of us are going to push our bikes half a dozen times or more. I have several what I consider very useful tips that are going to help with this pushing your bike part of the race. Here we go. First, dismount before you have to. I personally make a point of pride in most of my riding to go as far as I can and as hard as I can when I'm on impossible climbs, even though I know I'm going to have to eventually dismount. And you know what this is, Hottie? It is a single speeder habit I've developed because it makes you tough and strong. And during an endurance race, it is burning a match when there is no chance that I'm going to light a candle. So don't go into zone 5 just to go 5 feet. Instead, look ahead. And if you're at a spot where you are going to have to get off and walk, and you know you are, get into second gear, dismount before you come to a full stop, and then take your first step as your foot touches the ground. You don't ever have to come to a complete stop. Your average speed is going to stay close to the same, and you are going to save your matches for when they make a difference. Practice this rolling dismount on a climb before race day if it's new to you. Second, practice your uphill restart. This is the most valuable tip. And it is something that you do have to practice before race day. You don't have to be at a completely flat spot to restart your climb to get back on your bike. And that is why you got into second gear in this previous tip as you dismounted. Swing your leg back over the bike, clip in, push off with your foot that's on the ground, and go. Get so you can do this naturally. Get so you can do uphill restarts naturally, because you are going to use that skill several times during the day. Third tip, be ready to not be ready. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive, but this race becomes incredibly mind-bendingly difficult when you are at above 12,000 feet, when you are on the GO Trail, or when you are on the Powerline. I guess that's 11,000 feet. The fact is, it is just going to be harder than you can really even understand. Lisa and I were talking about this last night. It's hard to overstate how much the altitude is going to affect you the first time that you do this race. So when you're looking at a grade that your eyes tell you you should be able to ride and you can't, that really is okay. It doesn't mean your race day is done. It means that you're getting the experience that you paid for. So to the extent that you can walk with purpose, don't stop. That is the key thing. Nothing brings your average speed down like 0 miles per hour. And that gets us to our fourth tip. And that is, be prudent about passing. There's a decent chance that as you walk, someone ahead of you is going to be walking slower than you. When you catch them, the question becomes, should you pass? And I would say passing usually does not make sense when you are walking, because passing when you're walking, it's a slow affair. And if you are simply moving one place in what is in effect a Congo line, it isn't going to be worth it. So I say instead, when you are walking in a line up Columbine or up the power line, instead of passing someone when you catch them, use that opportunity to, when you're being slowed down just a little bit, to eat something, to drink something. Use the opportunity to eat a gel or two and take an extra long drink. People tend to fret about long lines in the hike bikes in the Leadville 100, when the reality is they are great opportunities for you to take a breath, fuel up, because you got a long day that is still ahead of you.
Yeah. Passing on that Goat Hill section can be not only tricky but dangerous, because you got riders coming down off the top of Columbine and they're already up to speed. So you really need to be quite careful there. And in fact, just stay in the line is the safer piece of advice there. I'll add to try and find something steep. This may be obvious, but when you're walking in Leadville, it's generally going to be steep and loose. So if you're out working on your walking, try to replicate it. Get on a steep hill and really see Fatty in one of the movies. I'll never forget you describing about how people walk up the power line, and you're literally, your body's at an angle that is level to your top tube, and you're just kind of laid out over your bike. I mean, that's how extreme the walking can be there. So it's a good idea to get at least a little feel for that kind of stuff. So find something steep. Like Fatty said, I think the shifting into the right gear you're going to need, the gear you're going to need when you remount, is really important. And maybe something a little higher or a little taller, something that's going to generate a little bit more. I don't know how many times I've gotten off my bike, remounted, forgotten to shift up, and then just spun out as I've tried to ride away, right? Even on the hill, and just rear wheel tire starts skidding out and everything, and no good, right? So you need a little bit of pressure to propel the bike forward as you remount. Finally, put your dropper down. If you've got a dropper, remember, drop it down, so it makes your remounts that much easier.
Yeah. The dropper can make a big difference in when you're super tired of having to swing your leg up just a little bit less can be really nice. And it might be worth us underscoring that being in a second gear, because that is not necessarily intuitive to riders who have not had to remount on climbs a lot of times. The intuitive thing is to be in your granny, right? To be in the lightest gear you possibly have. My experience is when I restart on a climb, being in second gear or maybe even in third gear means that I don't essentially spin my crank all the way to 6, to the lowest possible position before I have moved my rear wheel a foot and have, got enough motion to get balance. And then I stop again and you repeat that dance a couple of times.
Right.
So
Right.
it's restarts in the second or third gear are generally going to be what is a little bit easier, not necessarily intuitive until you've tried it a few times.
Yeah. And then once you get going, then you can downshift into a more comfortable climbing gear.
And get into your granny.
Right. So conserve your matches, practice your uphill restarts, be prepared to be surprised by the challenge of high altitude hiking during a race. And of course, you can focus on eating and not passing in those conga lines.
Yep. 4 good tips about the Leadville Hike Bikes for the price of one. Maybe you've already heard that the Leadville race has 3 new nutrition sponsors this year: Scratch, Precision Hydration, and Kinetic. Scratch and Precision, likely you already know. Kinetic is a ketone drink that Heidi and I have been trying. I love it, actually. And we'll be hearing from Kinetic a little bit later in the season about what that drink is and how to use it.
What we want to mention here is that these products will be on course. So if you're relying on the neutral feeds, then now's a good time to place an order with the feed and start getting used to Scratch, Precision Hydration, and gels, and maybe Kinetic. Neutral Aid is a totally viable way to tackle Leadville. My second year, I was with 2 Coloradans who big buckled using Neutral Aid.
Yeah, and now that we have a heads up on the brands that are going to be at the Neutral Aid stations, you can get a leg up by trying out these products. If it were me, I would be definitely checking out Scratch Hydration Mix and Chews, and then getting some Precision gels and see how those work for me. By the way, the Precision system is very similar to Never Second in that they measure things out in those nice 30-gram increments.
So stock up now and start working on your neutral feed plan. And when you make an order with the feed, you can claim your $80 annual credit at thefeed.com/Leadville. Register your email and verify your phone number, then spend your first feed credit of $20 right away. I went and watched a criterium the other day, and geesh, there are a lot of bad kits on display. I saw all kinds of bizarre designs and fonts and logos. Except one kit that looked pretty good. It was being worn by, and I'm going to butcher her name, I'm sure here, Georgeta Ungurinu, I think was her last name. She is the Romanian national champ. She races for iSpeed felt bikes, and she was wearing a kit by DNA.
Of course, it was DNA. I was wondering when we would get to DNA, but I knew we were going to get there when you said that it was a nice-looking kit, because DNA kits are just easy to spot, especially in a field of these really badly designed bike clothes. I don't know Georgetta, but I am sure she looked great. And that is the point. When a team wants to look put together, when they want to look pro in a kit that has multiple sponsors and make them all look happy and good, they can turn to DNA, because DNA can sort out the look of a kit and come up with a great design.
In the case of Georgetta, not only did DNA get her sponsors on, they had to get her country on her jersey as well. Georgetta, like we said, is the Romanian road race champ, so her country's colors were also part of that design. So hats off to Georgetta, who, by the way, was racing in the men's pro race, and hats off to DNA for making a kit that looks great and stands out.
Yeah, definitely, Hadi. Whether you are a national champ, a state champ, a club rider, or you just want to look good in your kit, you can have a kit that looks as good as what Hadi saw and what we'll all be riding in Leadville this year. Go to dnacycling.com to learn more. Tell them that the Leadville podcast sent you. One of the most common concerns expressed in our listener survey and in my own head is weight. It is, frankly, just a top concern and the source of my nickname. Even after 27 years of doing this race, no doubt weight is a factor. This is a climber's race, and anything that is not helping you move forward is slowing you down, making you roll downhill if you let it. So what can you do about it? And should you do anything about your body makeup?
To help us answer those questions, we have on the show Dr. Kyle Pfaffenbach of the Health and Human Performance Department at Eastern Oregon University. With a master's in exercise science and a PhD in nutrition, Dr. Kyle's main focus is on the cellular physiology of exercise and nutrition for sports performance. He's both a teacher and a coach, advising the likes of current Leadville record holder Keegan Swenson. Get out your notepad and your scale as we get some sound advice on making race weight for Leadville. And like we said, we're here with Dr. Kyle Pfaffenbach. I've been really working on that name, by the way. Pfaffenbach. It's, not an easy one, Dr. Kyle. Is it okay if I just call you Dr. Kyle?
It's what most people, yes. Even Kyle is fine.
Even
Doctor
Kyle.
seems, till to this day, it seems too formal. So,
Okay.
yeah, of course. Happy to be here. This is cool.
And like we said, Dr. Kyle knows a lot about physiology and exercise and nutrition and health, sports performance, and we're going to narrow in on one topic in particular, Dr. Kyle, and that is weight. I mean, weight becomes a huge dilemma for the Leadville racer. It is a climbing race. We all know that. We all know that carrying less weight uphill makes a difference. You add to that now the layer of watts per kilogram, which everyone's become aware of, and now we're all really like fretting over weight. I mean, weight is like this huge thing. Are we right?
Yes and no. I mean, you have to acknowledge that having less weight can be advantageous in particular settings. When you're climbing, when you're talking about efficiency, those types of things. That's where the yes is. So we just have to acknowledge that as a reality of this sport that we're involved with. The no part of that is that we have to let our own bodies do their thing. We can put them in a position to get into a weight that is right for the body. Where I see it getting a little bit more less effective, even dangerous, is when people decide what the weight they're going to get to is, and they set their goals around that. And that brings up a lot of the interesting parts of the physiology and the approach and those types of things. But it's, I think where I've seen in the past where people have gotten into trouble is when they say, I want to be here, and that's the goal. And then they even put another restrictive layer on it, which is that I want to be here at a specific time. And I need, and then it causes so much stress. And it's usually people take some kind of more extreme measures the first time, and it can work because the body's kind of going like, well, I don't know what we're so stressed out about and what we need to do, but we're not getting any food anymore. And I need to adjust to this. After you try that trick a couple times, the body starts pushing back, it seems like.
Right. Well, what if I told you I knew a cyclist who took up riding because he was concerned about his weight, and he also adopted a nickname, Fatty, to keep himself in line, to prevent himself from becoming too big season in and season out. Would you think there's a problem there?
That's absurd.
Not necessarily, but I would need.
Okay.
So I just had this discussion with if one of my students ends up coming across this, where I'm actually teaching an application class right now. So we spend so much time teaching about like this is what the science is, and we have finally created a class in our program that this is how you apply it to a variety of different folks across a variety of populations. And we just had a lecture about assessment. And I said, the most critical thing is to get the story. You have to have a good story in context. So, if it's not coming from Fatty himself, hottie, I would need a bit more of the story before I made a judgment call on said scenario. So,
Fatty, the floor is yours.
Oh, so yeah, at this point, I guess we address who has the more cringy nickname, Hottie, you or me? So, no, I mean, essentially, Dr. Kyle, you've just told the story of my life, right? I do, year in, year out, my body weight wants to go closer to 200 than to 160. I think of the number 150. I'm about 5'7", and think that is the weight that I ought to be. And I also know that I have been at that weight and raced the Leadville 100 and had a bad day. Whereas the fastest day I've ever had, I was right around 165 pounds. And there were a lot of factors there. I can't just say that was the golden weight. And I kind of wonder, when should I be working on my weight? Because I know 200 pounds for a 5'7" guy, that is not a great weight to be racing Leadville 100. But maybe I focus on that to the exclusion of a lot more important things. So yeah, walk me through when should we be losing weight? How much weight should we be worrying about?
One, you have to trust your body, and you have to trust your body in terms of now I really don't like putting a particular number or a particular timeline on things, and I call it turning the screws. So if I'm racing in August in the level 100, I start thinking about it. Well, you're probably thinking about it for more than even a year, but you start thinking about it after the holidays and you go, okay, I'm going to start laying down my base. I'm going to start doing these things. Just a little bit of a screw turn. We're not tightening the bolts yet because we have to have some flexibility. We have to get that base. We're doing higher volume, those types of things. Now, when you start to introduce intensity, you can't introduce too many things all at once. So you start introducing intensity, the weather gets nice, you start going on longer weekend rides. It seems like a natural time to also, get serious about nutrition. But that's also a time when you're introducing new physical stimulus to the system, and you want to be sensitive to that, because if you introduce like a restrictive diet that you've undershot and you're introducing new physical stimulus, all of a sudden you can put yourself into overtraining and overreaching pretty quickly. So again, there you might start to say like, all right, I'm just going to start thinking about what I'm doing from snacking. I'm going to start modulating my carbs a little bit to make sure I go into workouts with plenty of energy. But then coming out of workouts, if I know I have 2 recovery days, I can sort of make hay at that point. Like I have enough fat on my body to fuel recovery. I can back off on maybe some carbohydrates and maybe get a little bit, just test the water a little bit. So that's kind of like the next level. And then I'd say starting, depending on how your body responds and your age and your experience and where you've gone with this, somewhere around like 8 to 6 weeks out, you can really start cranking it down. And what I mean by that is like, we'll use different cues depending on the person that you're working with. So sometimes it's like, hey, I don't want you hungry right now. That means you're gripping too tight. That means you're holding on too tight at this point. There will be a time when I don't care if you're hungry. So I would say that's kind of the progression of it. But you have to be flexible and adaptable. It's not so much like people do better on a training program if they allow themselves a little bit of grace and flexibility, not because you're going to take advantage of it because you're lazy. It's because you're too high of an achiever and you'll overdo things because that's what the program says. And regardless of if I was stressed out, had to work late, I didn't get good sleep, and I kind of have a cold coming on, I'm still going to do, 10 of these repeats in 40 degrees while it's raining. And it would be way better long-term if you did like a trainer session and moved that around a little bit. And eating has to be the same thing with that approach until it's like, all right, now we gotta go here. We gotta see what my body's willing to give me. And even then, we're not being so restrictive that it's ruining our life, ruining our training, or we're sacrificing quality training and sleep for the number on the scale. Because you said it, you already said it, Fatty, like when you were your lightest, you didn't race the best. This happens all the time. And going back to Hadi's point earlier, where he said like a lot of people are more aware of grams per kilogram or watts per kilogram now, and they're, just you look at your watts per kilogram and then you say, but if I could just reduce that, whatever it is, numerator, denominator, whichever, the bottom number. If I could just
the one on the bottom,
exactly. If I could just reduce that bottom number. But the issue is that when you try and reduce that too much, we often see more of a reduction in the other number as well. And the watts per kilogram either stays flat or gets worse because you lose your power, because you're already at a weight that your body wants to be. So a big part of this is just like, you're getting ready to ride a 100-mile bike race. And if you've checked all the major boxes, you're really close. You're not, you can get too greedy, you can grip too tight, and it usually blows up, and you don't typically you're not in for as good of a day.
Dr. Kyle, should we be weighing ourselves? If so, how often? And is the good old scale good enough?
Let's work backwards from that. Is the good old scale good enough? The answer is yes, if that scale is reliable. It doesn't have to be accurate. It just has to be
Consistent.
reliable.
Yeah, okay.
And so what you're looking for then is your performance on the bike, and the way the performance on the bike trends with what you're skiing on the scale, and if that number on the scale is going up or down. The second thing is but I would not, it's very normal for hard training athletes to fluctuate between 1 to even up to 5 pounds a day, depending on how much water you retain, how much glycogen you can store. We store a lot of water with glycogen, so there's weight fluctuations there. There is, there's a lot of different considerations to take into account. Anyone that doesn't believe me, just weigh yourself right before you go to bed, weigh yourself first thing in the morning after you pee. It's gonna be different by 1 to 3 pounds. And so that just fluctuates a lot. So one, you don't want to go to the scale too often. You also want to be consistent with when you go to the scale. So typically it's the same day of the week, and usually people have a weekly program. A lot of times you'll have like an easy day followed by a day off, or a day off followed by an easy day. And it's the second of those 2 days that can really be useful. So like, let's say you go hard on Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday. That means Friday is your weigh day. So you would do that, and really early on, you're just making sure that there's no big jumps up or down, plus or minus, I'd say 8 to 10 pounds. It's not linear. It just can't, like, we're complex biological systems. We don't lose weight in a linear fashion. So the old idea of like, okay, I'm going to burn 500 calories excess a day. That's going to give me 3,500 calories a week. That's 1 pound per week. I should see a 1 pound reduction. It's not going to happen. And what I see is that what we see are just these flats, and then these big dips, and then it flattens out again, and then it'll dip again, and maybe come up again. And it depends on the season, and and it's really cool to see these trends in elite athletes, because the nose knows, man. When they start getting close to like big things, like cool things happen. And it's just like, I haven't even been trying, and all of a sudden I'm like where I'm supposed to be, and it's 7 days out. And like, I would have said that was an anomaly, but I've been doing this for about 11 years now, and it's pretty consistent. When people have the rest of their year, they're fueling properly, and then they just take these small, responsible, healthy steps towards their race weight, the body gets to where it wants to be, where it knows it's going to perform.
You just changed my life. I'm going to start weighing myself once a week. No, that matters. I hate Mondays. I mean, for a variety of reasons, but for that one in particular, it's like, I know that my weight is going to tell me bad.
Yeah. And especially if your training went well, that's just like, why would you want to put yourself through that mentally? Like, we have to focus on how do I feel on the bike? How do I feel? Like, how am I sleeping? And how's my mood? How am I, those early signs of chronic, like of relative energy deficiency, or underfeeding and overreaching, which often go together. Those early signs are decrease in mood, loss of motivation. You're not having fun on the bike. You're not looking forward to being on the bike. You're not sleeping well, and it feels like these are all sort of things where you have to go like, oh man, I'm either overtraining, undereating, and most likely it's both.
So maybe this is too general a question, considering you hardly know me at all, and you don't know our audience at all. But what are some general practical things that I can do to get a little bit lighter? Because I would like to be a little bit lighter. As I'm in my late 50s, I find that it's more difficult to lose the weight I would like to, without losing power, without losing motivation, without hitting those negatives that you just described.
Yeah. So this is where we would start. So it's really working in nutrition is so fun because everyone is like, it's very, very individual, but we are at some level all human. So there's these like really solid starting places, and then you kind of go from there. So the solid starting place, and again, you have to watch what your individual response is, and then have some grace and kindness with yourself in terms of flexibility. You're not doing it wrong if you start here and you don't have the same results as somebody else or those sorts of things. You just have to say, oh, okay, I haven't quite found what I'm a responder to here. So the most basic thing is that protein and fat are these long-term nutrients where if you're kind of under in protein, if you're not getting enough protein, you're not going to notice it day 1. You're not going to notice it day 3. You're not going to notice it until all of a sudden you're like, oh, I just am like, it sneaks up on you. And then all of a sudden, if I find out that you've been eating like 50 grams less protein per day than you're supposed to, even though you're meeting the RDA, I can't just sit you down and have you eat like a side of a cow and all your protein, all those things are back, right? I always tell this kind of joke but I'm not actually joking, but it is funny to think about. You can't just get it back right away. Fat's actually the same thing. A lot of people make this mistake. They want to lose fat, so they think they should stop eating fat. And you just need to bring fat down to the level that's appropriate for the turnover that's going on in your body. A lot of that's based off of body mass. And so, because if you're under in fat for too long and then all of a sudden you have no testosterone and estrogen and your cycle's messed up or your steroid-based hormones are all screwed up, you can't just eat like a bowl of Crisco and then you're back. Those things they're long fixes, right? So protein and fat, you need to get the same amount every day, regardless of training. It's very straightforward. And for protein, you want to be about somewhere between 1.4 and 1.8 grams per kilogram body weight. So for us that work in pounds, you just take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2, multiply it by 1.5 or 1.6, and then you get a little below that and a little above that. So we don't want to be too stringent. There's nothing, if it's 110, there's absolutely no difference, but you're not a failure in life if you're at 109 and an overachiever if you're at 111. It just starts you on the right path. For fat, you're really around, so you're really around like, I like people to be around 1.2, but when you're really turning the screws, you can go as low as 1 gram per kilogram body weight in fat. And this is the hardest one because fat is fat has a lot of calories per gram. And so if you overshoot in fat, you can really pay for it. But if you undershoot in fat, you can also really pay for it. So this is the one that, and it fills up pretty quick. If you're a 140 pounder and your kgs are around 65 grams of fat in a day is not that much. There's 70 grams of fat in 2 avocados. So like that can sneak up on people. And then for carbohydrates, there's really, there are recommendations for athletes in grams per kilogram body weight, but they fluctuate from 2 grams per kilogram body weight all the way up to 8 grams per kilogram body weight. If you're riding the Tour or the Giro, like you can go really big on grams per kilogram of carbs. What I basically tell people is like modulating carbs is where you're going to get your weight loss. And your body seems to do really well with that because we don't seem to respond as violently to fluctuations in carbohydrates as we do to long being underfueled when it comes to protein and fat. So protein and fat are those long-term nutrients, carbs where you can play around a little bit more. And then the other thing I always emphasize just from a general standpoint is once you know how much protein you need, once you know how much, So let me give an actual number for the carbs. So the recommended allowance for carbs is between 120 and 130 grams per day. And that's based off of what an adult brain basically needs. And this would be for someone that doesn't work out, is recreationally active. Your listeners and you're going to be training 4 to 7 days a week. You're going to be doing some long rides on the weekends. So you can be about 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram carbs per day generally. That's going to put you in that, 200, 250 grams of carbs where you're never fully getting depleted of glycogen, but you're also, that would be for like a heading into a day where you're not training. Heading into a big training day, you want to be as loaded in carbohydrates as you can because our brain really likes it when we're full of glycogen. And for, someone fatty size, let's say, what are you right now? Did you say 160 something?
Right now I'm about 170. Yeah.
Okay. So 170 right now, someone your size with your muscle mass, that in your endurance capacity, you could probably onboard somewhere around 400 or 500 grams of muscle glycogen and maybe a little bit more when you account for the liver. I mean, whole body glycogen is quite a bit. And when you think about like, I want that tank to be full before I go on my Saturday ride, that means in Thursday and Friday, I'm eating 100 to 150 grams of carbohydrates a meal so that when I step on the bike, I have 500, 600 grams of carbohydrates onboarded on Saturday. It messes with people's heads because they don't feel like they're allowed to eat unless they've earned it. But I don't care how good you eat after you do your key ride. I want you to do the key ride really well. That's the stimulus we want the recovery to. So it's really hard to get your mind around it, but we want to like quote unquote overeat the day before a hard ride and then undereat coming out of that ride.
Hadi, let's take a minute to explain Envy's handlebar specs. No matter what brand you're considering, these can be a little confusing. The rise is pretty straightforward. That is the amount of height built into the bar right at the stem. In the case of the M5 bar, it's 5 millimeters. It's a cross-country bar, so most riders are looking to stay low, so a small amount's all that's needed. In fact, the M5 can be flipped to obtain a negative rise with that bar.
The two specs that can cause confusion are back sweep and up sweep. Back sweep is the angle of the bar as it comes back towards the rider, and this spec mostly affects the angle of the hands and wrist. The M5 has 9 degrees, and that's pretty typical. The up sweep, or as Envy calls it, tip, is the amount the bar angles up, and this affects how far the elbows flare out. In the case of the M5, this number is 0 because Go Fast XC riders, like everyone listening here, like to keep their elbows tucked in. Other Envy bars like the M6 have a typical upsweep of 5 degrees.
Yep. And the last spec that would be the easiest, and that is width. It is, of course, the only one that can be changed at all. Envy carbon bars can be trimmed, which I have done for my wife, and actually I've done that for myself as well. Okay, so I'm glad we've cleared that up. Check out our Get a Grip episode from last season. That was show number 14 in season 6 for an interview with Envy and how to pick and set up your handlebars. And for the entire Envy mountain bike handlebar lineup, it is ENVE. That's envy.com.
Okay, back with Dr. Kyle Pfaffenbach and executing a sensible strategy for cutting weight. For the weekend warrior, especially, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll be forced into a situation where they have to load up a lot of their training on the weekend. So they'll go out, they'll ride hard Saturday, and they'll try and do another, good, not as hard, but a hard ride on Sunday. How are they coming out of that Saturday ride and getting ready for Sunday?
Yeah, so the key to this for this person is going to be in Thursday night to Friday. And then in that scenario, you have to treat Saturday the same way you treated Friday, which is I'm going into a hard ride. So one of the ways to think about this is stop thinking about a day as breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Start thinking about a day as the 3 meals before a workout. So if you know you're going huge on Saturday, let's say you have a nice easy spin to like prime the system to store a lot of glycogen and recover and all this type of stuff on Thursday. And say you do that, it's after work. So after work, you go get an hour and a half spin, an hour spin in Thursday after work. You take your recovery drink, then you go high carb at dinner Thursday, or moderate carb, and then it's high carb breakfast, lunch, and dinner on Friday, and then your high carb Saturday morning, you go and have an awesome ride. Then you have to be high carb coming out of that, along with hitting your protein goal and hitting your fat goal, because you're turning back around and going on Sunday. And then then coming out of the workout, once you're done on Sunday, the focus is, let's make sure I hit my protein, hit my fat. You get a reasonable amount of carbohydrates. But going into Monday, if you have back-to-back easy days, it's that first easy day that is your chance to get your biggest caloric deficit without paying the price. You can run a little bit more of an aggressive caloric deficit on that one day, which may be your contribution for the week. Instead of trying to do it all with little pieces each day, you sort of get it all. Because again, weight is not linear.
And will the body in those recovery days, that prime day for weight loss, will it choose fat and not dig into muscle?
Yes, if you're eating the proper amount of protein and you're not severely in caloric restriction. If you're getting high quality protein sources on a daily basis, if you're meeting your fat requirement, if you're not in too severe of a caloric deficit or you're overweight, if you're proactively fueling carbohydrates around key sessions, if you're getting a whole foods diet that's healthy with plenty of fruits and vegetables, and you're getting raw vegetables at every meal, your hydration is going okay. If you do that and you implement this sort of I'm going to stop worrying so much about what I'm eating coming out of workouts, doing what we quote unquote consider a healthy diet, but you're being proactive with your carb loading. And then you realize, I can get away with modulating carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are a quick fix. You could not eat carbohydrates for a whole week and you wouldn't feel great on the bike, but you could make it. And you probably wouldn't perform well. But as soon as you sat down and ate 6 cups of rice, you're kind of back. But protein and fat aren't like that. So then if you know you're getting your protein and fat on a daily basis and you do have a day where it just wasn't popping, then we kind of know what the culprit is. It's not that you've been nickel diming yourself with protein and fat. It's that you probably weren't aggressive enough either fueling on the bike or fueling beforehand with carbs.
So yeah, I mean, there's all these dials that we can affect. Another dial, a dial that only turns one direction, age. So tell me, how does this change, if it does change, for folks, as most of our listeners are 40 plus, and a good chunk of us are 50 plus?
So what I just said in terms of a basic approach, it applies across the age ranges. It just does. We need protein. It's very, very important, and we need it, enough of it on a daily basis to support our recovery and those type of things. We need fat. We need a certain amount of fat. We need to hold a certain amount of central body fat. We need high fat turnover. And even for, for the female athletes, fat is super critical to their monthly cycle and these types of things. And elite female, I've worked with a variety of elite female athletes that had very low body fat, but they ate lots of fat every day. They were turning it over, and so they kept a regular cycle, right? It's like these types of nuances. So as you age, these same things apply. You want to have carbohydrates. You want to have plenty of fat. You want to have, or you want to get the proper amount of fat. You want to get the proper amount of protein, and you want to be consistent with those things. What I notice with age, some of this is personal experience, but I'm not fully projecting. And some of it, I have had a handful of masters athletes that I've worked with. One, you just can't expect the same level of responsiveness that you expected in your 20s and even 30s. You're just not going to go, oh, what? Leadville's coming up in 6 weeks? I can get in shape by then. So things have to be a little more intentional. you pay the price on both ends. One, you don't get into shape as fast. You're more prone to injury. You're not going to lose weight as quickly. On the flip side of that, you kind of pay more of a price with that one extra beer, that couple extra pieces of, and so, but those are things that you have to find your own balance. Everyone has their own value system around those choices and their balance and those types of things. And that's what you say. So all the basic stuff that we've talked about here still applies. Protein, fat every day, modulate carbs. If you're getting your fat, you're getting your protein, you're getting your sleep, and you have a bad day, not a bunch of bad days, but one bad day, then you probably missed on carbs. If you have a bunch of bad days, you're probably overtraining or you're under fueling total calories, right? And that's a week's thing. That's a month's thing. That's not a day thing.
I have a couple of weird questions. I mean, maybe, well, actually, not very weird, highly topical and very timely. Ozempic. Do you have any athletes who are using Ozempic? And what kinds of effects would a Leadville racer maybe have to expect if they are using that?
So what I will say is Ozempic is very interesting. For those listening, Ozempic is the quick background on this is that it's part of a class of drugs. I think they're called GLP-1 inhibitors, and basically they were designed as a diabetes drug originally because they prevent the reabsorption of sugar at a specific site in the kidneys. This is the quick story. And so you end up peeing out more. And based on data that has been presented and that I've seen, the number I have is somewhere in the neighborhood of up to 300 to 500 calories a day that you can piss out with this. But what's interesting is that the weight loss that they're seeing when people take these drugs cannot be explained by urinary glucose loss alone. And so there's other mechanisms at play. And that's kind of where I would stop. That's kind of where my level of comfort in talking about it in a public realm would stop. And I would point you towards other people in the field. In terms of working with clients my approach is never to do something that we know has a long-term risk for any sort of short-term benefit. It is a health-first approach. And so I look at a lot of these things. So when I talk about that approach about modulating carbs and doing these different things and making sure you get enough protein and making sure you have enough fat, making sure you have whole foods and raw vegetables and a balanced diet and all those different types of things, those are actually things that apply to a health first approach. That's also where I would start for someone that's just trying to get off the couch and be more active. I would start in the same place. It's just the carb modulation is way more drastic when it comes to endurance athletes because of the performance benefits and the flux, the throughput when it comes to carbohydrates.
So any differences that you would see between men and women? We did age. Now let's talk about gender and how we should be eating differently depending on male and female.
In my experience, the protein, fat, and the carbohydrate thing still works. This approach still works for males and females. Now, there's going to be some slight different considerations, especially if you're really turning the screws and you're a premenopausal female athlete. And when you're really turning the screws, man, it's a fine line, especially when it comes to fat intake and maintaining essential body fat and those types of things. So we have a tendency to err on the safe side of all these things, where I want a little more. It's not what I want. I would suggest or recommend being kind of to the right of that line or in the safe side of that line than going like, oh, let's just get super greedy and go under it. Because, yeah, you might do great for one race or one season or one part of a season, but then you're cooked. And so that's an important consideration. So getting the fat thing becomes an important part from a postmenopausal cycling standpoint. Bone density becomes really critical. So estrogen is very protective of bone density, and so that's a consideration. There's, you, especially for aging athletes, we want to implement a little bit of strength training into the routine, even if we don't like going to the gym. It's one of those necessary evils if we want to stay on the bike, or just decrease our risk of catastrophic results from a random crash or something like that, right? Like you kind of have to be prepared for those types of things. So yeah, I would say that the basic approach still works, male or female, but then there's these other considerations that need to be taken into account. Hydration can be a little different, especially if the monthly cycle fluctuates a little bit. But I'm hesitant to give out too many recommendations because they're only going to fit for a small number of. It's just saying consider that and then birth control is another big consideration. If you're on birth control, if you're off birth control, if you just those types of things are all important considerations. And, you would want to work with your profession. You wouldn't want to base your whole nutrition plan when it comes to those nuances off of a Leadville 100 podcast.
All right, Dr. Kyle. Great, really good stuff here. Good stuff to walk away with. We're going to steady our protein and fats, modulate our carbs, watch our mood and performance, just to make sure we're kind of getting things right. And then, of course, we'll monitor our weight. Got a green light there, which is cool. Just don't obsess too much over it. And hopefully just steadily drop, when we're ready to, a few pounds as we get closer to Leadville. Dr. Kyle, thanks so much for all your advice and for being on the show.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. That was super fun. And good luck to everyone that's racing. And hopefully this was... It added usable information, not, this is one more thing I have to get ready for and implement before August. So it shouldn't be like that. This should give you hope and optimism as you head towards your goals in August. So yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks again to Dr. Kyle. A couple of follow-up notes from our discussion on the topic of Ozempic and the athlete. Dr. Kyle suggests you check out the work of his colleague, Dr. Sean Newsom at Oregon State University. And for women in menopause, the FASTR, that's FASTR, Performance Lab at Stanford is doing great work in that area. We'd also recommend you to check out Celine Yeager's podcast, Hit Play Not Pause, along with the book she wrote with Dr. Stacy Sims, and that's called Next Level. If you'd like to share a story on weight with our other podcast listeners, a good place to do that is our Slack channel. You may even hear from Fatty directly, or me. Check it out at leadville.fm/Slack.
So if you like this show, please go wherever you listen and give us a 5-star rating, write us a review to see all the ways you can find this independent show. It is leadville.fm. Good luck in your Leadville weight goals, your training, your recovery, your fueling, everything. Thanks for listening. We're going to see you in August at the starting line.